This isn't an edit, so anything you say will be used against you.
Right.
Yeah. Are you on?
I've been warned.
Hey, look, we're live here outside the US Embassy. If you see, it's like bubble wrap all around it. I don't know what they're trying to protect themselves from, but I wouldn't want to work in there, would you? It looks like you wouldn't get much sunlight in there. God, it looks hideous, doesn't it? I'm here with Peter Ford from No2Nato, No2War. We're doing a rally here. No2Nato, No2War is doing a rally to mark the inauguration of Donald Trump. What do you think is the significance of the change from Biden to Trump for the world? How would you see it in world affairs?
First of all, slight correction. We're here to mark the departure of Genocide Joe, rather than to welcome Trump, who is an unknown quantity as yet. We're here primarily to say good riddance to Genocide Joe, whose striking achievement, if we can call it that, has been to perpetuate over 450 days of torture for the people of Gaza. And he goes out not with an achievement, but with a stain on his reputation. He's had to wait until Trump is in the green room waiting to go on before the Israelis would pay any attention, because the Genocide Joe has been a doormat for the Israelis. A complete doormat. They wiped their feet over him, trampled him, and he's come back asking for more punishment at the hands of the Israelis. Well, now we may see a change of regime. Well, we will see a change of regime in Washington, and I slightly have the feeling that Trump is not someone who will be treated like a doormat, but we shall see.
I mean, with one going, you get another one. So, I mean, you're not upbeat about Trump, but Biden has been a catastrophe for Palestine in particular. Is there any other areas of the world that he hasn't made more difficult for us?
Well, the irony is that he did do one good thing, Biden, which was to withdraw US forces from Afghanistan, though most of the world sees that as a big mistake, which is stupid, because it was the one sensible thing he did, to cut America's losses, to give up the useless, pointless, futile, bloody, long, forever war in Afghanistan. And all those pundits who are claiming that Afghanistan would become a disaster and a new focus for terrorism have been proven wrong. But who in the media is going to point out that? The same pundits, the same terrorism experts are being listened to today, but they got Afghanistan wrong. And Joe, for all his faults, perhaps we shouldn't praise him for this. He really had no choice. The Pentagon wanted out. They'd had enough. They were doing nothing. But departure from Afghanistan was the one thing he did that deserves credit.
Now, the issue that I'm interested to hear from you is about Syria. I mean, the situation in Syria. You were in Syria. You were the ambassador in Syria, so you know more than anyone else about this. What is it about some people thinking it's a good thing that Assad's gone? It can't be a good thing for Palestine. Do you think it? I don't get this issue. What's your view on it?
The collapse of the Assad government is a tragedy, not least for Palestine, also obviously for the people of Syria themselves. They're already seeing some of the fruits of so-called liberation. The religious police are now unleashed on the streets of Damascus, and women are being brought to heel if they're not dressed appropriately. Much worse than that is taking place on the streets of towns like Latakia, where the Alawite community is being persecuted. But the irony, I mentioned Afghanistan just now, the irony is that the Americans left Afghanistan. They thought that they'd been fighting Al-Qaeda, but in fact, all that happened was that Al-Qaeda transferred its headquarters to Idlib in Syria, and now with the Americans' blessing and active support, they are now installed in Damascus. What you have in Damascus is an Al-Qaeda regime. This is embarrassing for the Americans, and therefore the regime are about to change their name. The HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was the latest branding for Al-Qaeda, will soon be no more. Another triumph of marketing.
And the British are in negotiations with HTS, and at the same time it's still prescribed, isn't it, as an organisation here? I mean, how can they do that, and what does that mean about groups like Hamas? If they prescribe HTS but they can negotiate with them, yet no one can say anything at all relating to Hamas without being under fear of arrest. It seems crazy, doesn't it?
Double standards. We've got used to them with British and American diplomacy. They base their decisions not on objective reality of which groups are carrying out terrorism, but whether they're our terrorists or somebody else's terrorists. And in the case of HTS, it's shameful that British diplomats are talking to this group, still officially designated for the moment as terrorists. But as I mentioned, within a few weeks, HTS will have been dissolved, and the problem in the eyes of British diplomacy will have also dissolved, and they can get on cuddling up close to Al-Qaeda in its new guise of a so-called interim government.
I actually saw you at the demonstration on Saturday in London. We've had lots of people being arrested. There's a lot of intimidation from the police. What did you witness there? What did you think about what happened?
Well, what shocked me was the fact that there were a small group of pro-Israel demonstrators with some supporters of the notorious Tommy Robinson, so-called. A group of them had installed themselves right in the middle of Whitehall, were trying to stage a provocation, and they were surrounded by a police cordon. They must have been breaking the law just to be there, let alone to try to instigate a riot. So again, double standards. The police were apparently keen to arrest supporters of Palestine, but not only they didn't arrest the pro-Israeli, pro-Tommy Robinson lot, but they facilitated their provocation.
I mean, you've seen that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell were asked to go to talk to the police under caution, or I think that's the term, and the organiser was arrested and held overnight. What do you think this is? Just an attempt to silence people through intimidation, get these prominent people in trouble, and then we'll all fall in behind them? How else can you really see this?
Frankly, it's hard to understand because at previous marches, the Met have actually, in my personal opinion, been quite good, and they've avoided serious trouble. Until last Saturday, there had never been more than a handful of arrests. I simply don't know what prompted this change of heart and tactics on the part of the Met. We can only guess that they've come under political influence. Is it that the British authorities want to impress our American friends? I don't know.
Right. Now, it looks like George Galloway's just arrived here, and he's about to make a speech. Hi, George. Good to see you.
See you.
There's a lot of people to film this.
Nice to see you. Well, but where is it? There.
There's the bubble wrap. Yeah.
Fine, thank you.
So we'll be seeing George is going to make a speech, I think, in a minute, and we'll show that, and we'll get some more interviews after this. There's some good posters up as well. One about, if you look around, there's one about Biden, good riddance. I don't know if you can get that.
They ask him if he'll speak to you quickly on camera now.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Now you can see Chris Williamson's here as well. So,
Ladies and gentlemen, if I can get your attention, please, we're going to be starting our proceedings. Our Deputy Leader, Chris Williamson, will be the first speaker. And if you'd like to get your cameras ready, Chrissy, if you'd like to jump up to the top for me. Health and safety issues. I need you to, with that microphone next to you as well. Yeah, of course, yeah. 2 minutes. Okay. No, not even 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Give me the green light when you're ready. Okay. Well, if you'd said to me 20 years ago that I'd be here celebrating the termination of a democratic presidency, I would have said that you are talking through your hat. We're talking about the Democratic Party, the party that gave us John F. Kennedy, that gave us Franklin D. Roosevelt. But what have they done? I mean, I always thought, and none of the presidents that have come after JFK lived up to his standard, but I always felt that the Democrats were the lesser of two evils. But what we've seen over the last 4 years is not only are they not the lesser of two evils, they are far more evil than the alternative. We've seen the most disgraceful and appalling and abhorrent Gaza genocide, where well over 100,000, possibly 200,000 when we see the real figures, people that have lost their lives. We know, don't we, as well, that children are having to have their limbs amputated without anaesthetic. And some of the doctors, some of the surgeons who are having to undertake those gruesome operations were having to carry out those operations on their own children. How disgraceful, how appalling is that? And of course, it's only been made possible thanks to Genocide Joe and Bomber Harris. Were it not for the US administration, then the Gaza genocide would not have started in the first place, let alone carry on for the best part of 15 months. And then, of course, there is the slaughter that we've seen in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians would be walking the streets today, would they not, were it not for NATO's support, were it not for the US's support for NATO's proxy war in Ukraine. And we also know, don't we, we talk about amputations, but tens of thousands, 50,000, maybe more, according to some of the estimates that I've seen, of Ukrainians are now having to live out the rest of their lives with some of their limbs having been removed as a result of this horrific war. A war that should never have started. Let's remember, there was a proposition from the Russian Federation in November or December, I think it was, of 2021, calling for peace and security in Europe. And what were they asking for? A very reasonable proposition, in my opinion. What they were saying was that there should be no further expansion of NATO, and there should be a commitment that Ukraine will never become a member of NATO and will never station nuclear weapons on Ukrainian soil. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with Ukraine being a neutral country, like Austria say? What is wrong with that? That would be far, far preferable, would it not? But of course, we know, don't we, that the military-industrial complex are the main benefactors from war and chaos. And it was a Republican president in his valedictory speech Eisenhower in 1961, I believe it was, when he said that we needed to be mindful, to be careful about the power of the military-industrial complex. It was indeed Eisenhower, I believe, who coined that term. And they've been out of control ever since, in reality. And of course, as Julian Assange has said, these wars aren't necessarily about winning a war, it's about creating a forever war. A war whereby public money can be washed through the killing fields of Afghanistan, the killing fields of Ukraine, the killing fields in Gaza and other conflicts around the world, and then back into the coffers of the military-industrial complex. These people are completely amoral, and they're being facilitated by the political class, facilitated by Genocide Joe and Bomber Harris. It was Smedley Butler, you know, wrote a book back in 1935 talking about war is a racket. And he's absolutely right. He said he never did any good in his entire career as a senior military person in the US military. He said he's basically a hired hand for Wall Street, and things haven't improved since then. They've got considerably worse. And Julian Assange said, didn't he, that all wars are started by lies. And if war can be started by lies, then peace can be started by truth. And that's what we're here today, to call for the truth and to demand that President Trump holds good on his commitment to be a peacekeeper. I made a speech a few years ago in Trafalgar Square. There were a few more people there on that occasion than there is today. But I said at that point that Donald Trump was a menace. I think I owe him an apology, because the real menace has been Genocide Joe and Bomber Harris, has it not? And as I've already said, you know, Trump didn't start any wars during his 4-year premiership. Yes, he made some wrong turns, in my opinion. He absolutely did. And moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, I think, was certainly a wrong step. And the assassination of Qasem Soleimani was another outrageous step in which the Trump administration collaborated with Israel. But in comparison to Joe Biden's administration, it certainly pales into absolute insignificance. So I think what we're saying today is let's raise a toast to the end of Genocide Joe. Let's raise a toast to the fact that Harris wasn't able to get over the line, because make no mistake, had Harris won this election, we would not now have a ceasefire in Gaza. The genocide would continue. Yes, it's an imperfect ceasefire. Yes, we need to be vigilant. Some people are pessimistic about the prospects for the ceasefire holding. I'm actually more optimistic. I think it is more likely to hold than it won't, because the Israeli army is demoralized. The Israeli economy is on its knees after 15 months of this war. And so I think there is some hope for the future. So as I say, let's raise that toast and let's call on President Donald Trump to give peace a chance.
Thank you very much, Chris. Much appreciated. I'd like to introduce you to our other Deputy Leader, Mr. Peter Ford, His Excellency, the former Ambassador of Britain to Syria. And we're just going to do a bit of health and safety, make sure he doesn't fall over and damage me.
Thank you, Horst. Thank you, everyone who's managed to negotiate through London today. Many bits of public transport working properly. Anyway, we are here today mainly to say good riddance to Joe Biden. Good riddance to Genocide Joe, because the genocide which has been Gaza is what will mark his presidency. Historians of the future will say that this was the stain on Biden's reputation, the thing that he will go down in history for, endorsing, supporting, funding, arming propagandizing for, doing diplomacy for, stretching out, totally supporting what the Israelis have been doing for over 400 days in Gaza. No problem. He's been supporting Israel carrying out its atrocious acts for which it hopefully will be brought to international justice. And Joe Biden has been an accomplice. If there was any real international justice, Joe Biden would be arraigned for being an accomplice to genocide. But I come here also not to bury Caesar, but to praise him. Believe it or not, I would praise Biden for two things. Now, I'm not going rogue here. Keep the men in white coats back. Bear with me for a moment. Bear with me for a moment. I'm not going senile like Biden. Biden will also be remembered for two quite good things. One happened only 2 days ago. He lifted Cuba off the list of America's long list of official state sponsors of terrorism. Well, it's only come a few decades late and was always absolutely ridiculous. The whole idea that Cuba could be a state sponsor of terrorism, but never mind, better late than never. The great pity, however, is that while he was at it, Genocide Joe did not recommend that Israel be put on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, where they fully belong. They have been carrying out terrorism over decades. More recently, they have stepped up their terrorism, and what other word applies to what they have been doing in Gaza, a deliberate policy of terrorizing an entire population and decimating literally that population. Israel is a state sponsor of terrorism. And the second good thing, bear with me still, the second good thing that Joe Biden did was to withdraw US troops from Afghanistan, something for which he's given no credit by all the pundits and the experts in America and even here in London. In fact, he didn't actually negotiate his way out of Afghanistan. It was forced on him. The Pentagon didn't want to keep bringing soldiers back on a totally pointless mission, another endless war in Afghanistan. But Joe deserves a tiny bit of credit for going ahead with that. The irony, however, is that Al-Qaeda just transferred its attention from Afghanistan to Syria. And the Americans, having fought for over 20 years in Afghanistan, allegedly to keep Al-Qaeda at bay, just transferred the action to Syria, first of all by helping to establish Al-Qaeda under its different guises, brands, setting up in Idlib province, and now, more recently, obviously, extending their power to the whole of Syria. And they are still Al-Qaeda, and yet they come into power on an American magic carpet. But never mind, they will soon change their names again, because the latest news is that HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, their current incarnation, is going to be dissolved. Simple as that, and they will henceforth be known as something like the interim government of Syria. But they will be Al-Qaeda, and the Americans will have put them in power in the key state in the Middle East. And the sole reason is that that will please Israel. So we go full circle with Biden. Even the good things that he's done come back in the end to supporting Israel, and that is what he will be remembered for. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, I give you George Galloway, the leader of the Workers' Party, the voice of our nation, the voice of Palestinians, the voice of Arabs, and everyone else that's been downtrodden on, from Kashmir to Sri Lanka to any place where people are getting downtrodden. George Galloway has been the person that stood up for them.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Peter Ford, former Member of Parliament Chris Williamson, Chairman Hawes, and those of you who have come here today to say bye-bye Biden, bye-bye Blinken, good riddance to bad rubbish. People ask me, are you really happy that Donald Trump is back in the White House? I put it this way. I'm not happy that Donald Trump is back in the White House, but I am overjoyed that Kamala Harris is not, that Joe Biden is not, that the Biden-Blinken murder gang have been overthrown. They have been regime changed, just like so many others that they have engineered, that Ambassador Ford was just discussing a moment ago. They are gone. They are nothing. They are zilch, nada. They are zero. And they will be remembered only for the trail of blood and shame and disgrace that they leave behind them. I came a little earlier, but I am older than my colleague Chris Williamson, to the realization that the Democrats were actually the greater evil in the duopoly that is United States politics. I believe that America died in November of 1963 in the Nightmare on Elm Street in Dallas, Texas, and that every president ever since has been nothing more than a criminal. But the criminals who have waged the greater carnage have always been the Democrats. My first great political awakening was the American war on Vietnam. I ached physically watching, not as we can now in real time, but in dispatches coming days, sometimes weeks after the fact. And I knew that this was a Democratic Party war. This was a war that was waged by Lyndon Johnson. And that though many, many crimes were committed by Richard Nixon, it was the Republicans that negotiated seriously and eventually brought that war to a close. It was a realization that was later, in parallel, arrived at in relation to British politics. The Labour Party, as Keir Starmer is proving every single day, are a greater evil than Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Prime Ministers that went before him. I see Liz Truss is in Washington, by the way. If you go, will you send back a lettuce from America, as the song says, almost. The fact that Keir Starmer is not invited to the inauguration of Donald Trump, but Liz Truss is, is a measure of the staggering incompetence of the British Prime Minister, who managed to insult. I mean, if he'd asked me, I'd have said, after watching elections for more than half a century, you better be careful taking a side because Donald Trump has a very high chance of winning this. But no, Keir Starmer sent 100 Labour apparatchiks to go and work for Kamala Harris in the election, and then complains about Americans interfering in British politics. But his greatest insult is to appoint as Britain's ambassador to Washington the close friend and associate of the suicided child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Peter Mandelson sacked from Tony Blair's cabinet. You have to be pretty sordid to be too dirty for Tony Blair's cabinet. He was twice sacked from Tony Blair's cabinet for double dealing, dirty dealing, and corruption. So what's the best thing to do with him? Send him as His Majesty's envoy to the court of Donald Trump. I hope that Donald Trump rejects Peter Mandelson.
Oh, yes.
He would be doing the British people a favour if he rejected Peter Mandelson in that role. So the ugly story of the last 4 years, and by the way, how's this for an irony? If they hadn't rigged the 2020 election, this would be the last day of President Donald Trump. This would be the last day of his second term, but they rigged the election to get rid of Trump, and now he's back. Now, I don't know Donald Trump. He did listen to some of the early Moat's Mother of All talk shows. I know that for a fact. I don't know him. But my take on him, he's a pretty vengeful guy. He harbors a grudge. He will not forget all of those who were ganged up against him. And I hope that he includes Keir Starmer in that. He should differentiate, though, from the British people who never supported Keir Starmer. Only 19%, in fact 18.8% of the British electorate voted for Keir Starmer. Only a third of those who voted in the general election voted for Keir Starmer. And so my message to you, President Trump, is don't punish the British people for the fact that we've got an unvarnished, robotic block of wood as our Prime Minister. Help us to get rid of him rather than punish us for having him in 10 Downing Street. Now, some fools who call themselves left-wing mocked us this morning only briefly before taking it down because they realized how foolish it was. Criticized us for having this event to say goodbye to Biden and Blinken, or Blinken and Biden, as I like to put it, for I am perfectly sure that the farther Joe Biden slipped into his dotage, the more Anthony Blinken was calling the shots, literally the shots, all over the world on behalf of the United States of America. But let me just summarize what Donald Trump has achieved, and he isn't yet the president. But for him, Palestinian women and children in Gaza would still be being cut to pieces in the Gaza Strip today, but they are not. A ceasefire has been achieved. Trump gave a speech last night. I could have given it myself. He said, I have stopped World War III. And you've no idea, he said, how close we were to World War III under Biden and Blinken. Well, that's a pretty big achievement, isn't it? It's a pretty big achievement to declare that you will not allow the Ukraine imbroglio to drag the whole world into a nuclear holocaust. Gaza ceasefire, no World War III, and, said Trump, I'm going to stop the war in Ukraine. A war which should never have started, which has cost the lives of more than 1 million people and the expenditure of hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion or more, of wasted treasure, blood and treasure, provoked by NATO, organized by NATO, armed by NATO, funded by NATO, covered for by NATO, shilled for by the NATO media in this country and in others. If Donald Trump goes to Geneva, as I think it will be, and makes a deal with President Putin that brings an end to that slaughter and that waste which has destroyed European economies, impoverished European people, laid cold in their grave Britain's old age pensioners who cannot afford to heat their homes. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that something we should say is an achievement? If, as he says, President Trump goes to China to meet with President Xi and brings about at least a reduction in the tension and the danger of conflict between the United States and China, isn't that a good thing? Because Biden would never have done any of those things. That's why we are here today. Now, of course, the possibility exists. Let's not use Theresa May's phrase, highly likely, but it's quite likely that Trump will do, and especially say, things that we don't like, that are ugly, vulgar, inane, idiotic. That's quite likely. But I tell you this, I'd rather take a chance on the Trump presidency rather than the certainty of war throughout the world under Joe Biden and Antony Blinken and Kamala Harris. And of course, when he does the wrong thing, we'll be back here demonstrating against the Trump administration. But if he does the right thing, then we will applaud it. When facts change, so do my opinions, said Groucho Marx. And then he asked, what about you? Well, the facts are changing. And I believe, like Chris, that this ceasefire in Gaza will hold. I believe that an agreement over Ukraine will be reached, but they better hurry up or there won't be any Ukraine left to have an agreement with or about. I believe that Trump will, as he said last night, release the files on the murder of John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Jeffrey Epstein. Although if I was Trump, I'd release the Epstein one first because that's the one most likely to get him shot. Get that one out first, Donald, while you can. But I cried when Jack Kennedy was murdered on the streets of Dallas. I want to know for sure who killed him. I cried when Bobby Kennedy was killed in a kitchen in California in 1968, and I want to know what really happened. I want to know who killed Martin Luther King. I want to know who killed Malcolm X. I want to know who the customers were for Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And Trump is promising to release them. And he should. And he should do so swiftly. If he doesn't, we'll condemn him. If he does, we will congratulate him. That's the kind of common sense socialist party that the Workers' Party of Britain are. Now, No to NATO, No to War, which we started, has become broader. Many people have given their support to No to NATO, No to War, that are not only not in the Workers' Party, but are probably in every other respect against the politics that we stand for. And that was the point. That's why we started it. We wanted to provide a place for the maximum number of people to say no to NATO, no to war. You don't have to share our other politics to be against war and against the war machine that is NATO. So I invite everyone watching, of course, to join the Workers' Party, but in particular and now to follow No to NATO, No to War, so it can beat the algorithm which is presently strangling it, as so many of you already know. So it's bye-bye Biden, good riddance to bad rubbish. We hope never to see your face again. God knows the state you'll be in if we ever do have to listen to you again. Kamala Harris, about which I've said little and care less. The Democrats are done. Just like Labour are done. There will never be another Labour government in Britain. That's how bad the first 6 months of Keir Starmer's government have been. The Democrats are done. Labour are done. Something new is required, and something new is hoving into view, and that, I hope, will be us. Thank you very much indeed for coming to this event today.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to this Workers' Party and No to NATO rally. It's much appreciated. That's the end of the proceedings. Thank you.
Right now, there's some pictures being taken now. So yeah, we've come all the way here. So we had the we obviously had the protest in. Oh.
Look at me. I want pictures taken with those people around.
You're going to watch? So we'll just take some.
Get your signs up.
So show what people are doing here.
Get the signs up. No to NATO. Ready? Everyone get together. Anybody else want to take some pictures? Feel free. Everyone ready? Look at the camera. 3, 2, 1. Cheese! 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 Okay. Done. You're happy? Everyone happy? Anybody else want to take pictures? It's £5 each, please. You done, everyone? No worries, everyone done? That's done. Everyone happy?
I love you.
Right,
I never tell you.
Enjoy.
Thank you, Horst.
No worries.
I am in Ukraine, yeah, against NATO, not against Russia.
Oh, thank you. I think we're going to leave the broadcast now because it's become a little bit of a scrum around George Galloway. But we'll try and do some more of these live streams, which we're not getting much joy with protests generally. So if we can keep doing these, that would be great. If you want to keep following us, subscribe to the Crispin Flintoff Show on YouTube and get alerts, and then you'll know when these broadcasts are coming out. There'll be lots more to come, and I hope you enjoyed this live broadcast from outside the bubble-wrapped US Embassy here in Battersea. If you look around, look at the monstrous buildings you see around it. It's absolutely disgusting, all these high-rises. It's like anyway, hope you enjoyed it, and catch up with you another time.
Well, started asking questions. So yeah.